Citadel by Aljaz Budris. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Greg Marguerite. Citadel by Aljaz Budris. He was looking for a privacy his strange personality needed, and never quite seemed to achieve it. All his efforts were somehow great triumphs of the race, and great failures for him. Section 1. The aging man was sweating profusely, and he darted sidelong glances at the windowless walls of the outer office. By turns he sat stiffly in a corner chair, or paced uneasily, his head swiveling constantly. His hand was clammy when Meade shook it. "Hello, Mr. Meade," he said in a husky, hesitant voice, his eyes never quite still, never long on Meade's face, but darting hither and yon, his glance rebounding at every turn from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, the closed outer door. Christopher Meade, Assistant Undersecretary for External Affairs, returned the handshake smiling. "Please come into my office," he said quickly. "It's much more spacious." "Thank you," the aging man said gratefully, and hurried into the next room. Meade rapidly opened the windows, and some of the man's nervousness left him. He sank down into the visitor's chair in front of Meade's desk, his eyes drinking in the distances beyond the windows. "Thank you," he repeated. Meade sat down behind the desk, leaned back, and waited for the man's breathing to slow. Finally he said, "It's good to see you again, Mr. Holliday. What can I do for you?" Martin Holliday tore his glance away from the window long enough to raise his eyes to Meade's face, and then drop them to the hands he had folded too deliberately in his lap. His voice husked into unintelligibility, and he had to begin again. "I'd like to take an option on a new planet," he said finally. Meade nodded. "I don't see why not." He gestured expressively at the star chart papered over one wall of his office. "We've certainly got plenty of them. But what happened with your first one?" Mr. Holliday, I certainly won't be offended if you'd prefer to look out the window," Meade said quickly. "Thank you." After a moment he began again. "It didn't work out," he said, his glance flickering back to Meade for an instant before he had to look out the window again. "I don't know where my figuring went wrong. It didn't go wrong. It was just things. I thought I could sell enough subdivisions to cover the payments and still keep most of it for myself, but it didn't work out." He looked quickly at Meade with a flash of groundless guilt in his eyes. "First I had to sell more than I'd intended, because I had to lower the original price. Somebody'd optioned another planet in the same system, and I hadn't counted on the competition. Then, even after I'd covered the option and posted surety on the payments, there were all kinds of expenses. Then I couldn't lease the mineral rights." He looked at Meade again, as though he had to justify himself. "I don't know how that deal fell through. The company just withdrew all of a sudden." "Do you think there might have been anything peculiar about that?" Meade asked. "I mean, could the company have made a deal with the colonists for a lower price after you'd been forced out?" Holliday shook his head quickly. "Oh no, nothing like that. The colonists and I got along fine. It wasn't as though I hadn't put the best land up for sale, or tried to make myself rich. Why, after I'd had to sell some of the remaining land, and I knew it wasn't worth staying any more, some of them offered to lend me enough money to keep 50,000 square miles for myself." He smiled warmly, his eyes blank while he focused on memory. "But that wasn't it, of course," he went on. "I had my original investment back, but I couldn't tell them why I couldn't stay. It was people. Even if I never saw them, it was the thought of people with aircraft and rockets and roads." "I understand, Mr. Holliday," Meade said in an effort to spare him embarrassment. Holliday looked at him helplessly. "I couldn't tell them that, could I, Mr. Meade? They were good people, friendly people who wanted to help me. I couldn't tell them it was people, could I?" He wet his dry lips and locked his eyes on the view outside the window. "All I want, Mr. Meade, is half a planet to myself," he said softly. He shook his head. "Well, it'll work out this time. This time I won't have to sell so much, and I'll have a place to spend what time I've got left in peace without this. He gestured helplessly in an effort to convey his tortured consciousness of his own fear. Meade nodded quickly as he saw his features knot convulsively. "Of course, Mr. Holliday. We'll get you an option on a new planet as quickly as we can." "Thank you," Holliday said again. "Can we handle it today? I've had my credit transferred to a local bank." "Certainly, Mr. Holliday. We won't keep you on Earth a moment longer than absolutely necessary." He took a standard form out of a desk drawer and passed it to Holliday for his signature. "I'll be smarter this time," the aging man said, trying to convince himself as he uncapped his pen. "This time it'll work out." "I'm sure it will, Mr. Holliday," Meade said. Section 2. Marlowe was obese. He sat behind his desk like a tuskless sea lion crouched behind a rock, and his cheeks merged into jowls and obliterated his neck. His desk was built specially so that he could get his thighs under it. His office chair was heavier and wider by far than any standard size, its casters rolling on a special composition base that had been laid down over the carpeting, for Marlowe's weight would have cut any ordinary rug to shreds. His jacket stretched like pliofilm to enclose the bulk of his stooped shoulders, and his eyes surveyed his world behind the battlemented heaviness of the puffing flesh that filled their sockets. A bulb flickered on his interphone set, and Marlowe shot a glance at the switch beneath it. "Secretary quite contrary," he muttered inaudibly. He flicked the switch. "Yes, Mary?" His voice rumbled out of the flabby cavern of his chest. "Mr. Meade just filed a report on Martin Holliday, Mr. Secretary. Would you like to see it?" "Just give me a summary, Mary." Under his breath he whispered, "Summary that mummery, Mary," and a thin smile fell about his lips while he listened. "Gave him Karlshaven 4, eh?" he observed when his secretary finished. "Okay, thanks, Mary." He switched off and sat thinking. Somewhere in the bowels of the body administrative, he knew, notations were being made and cross-filed. The addition of Karlshaven 4 to the list of planets under colonization would be made, and Holliday's asking prices for land would be posted with emigration, together with a prospectus abstracted from the General Galactic Survey. He switched the interphone on again. Mary, supply me with a copy of the GenSurv on the entire Karlshaven system. Tell Mr. Meade I'll expect him in my office sometime this afternoon. You schedule it, and we'll go into it further." "Yes, Mr. Secretary. Will 15:15 be all right?" 15:15's fine, Mary," Marlowe said gently. "Yes, sir," his secretary replied, abashed. "I keep forgetting about proper nomenclature." "So do I, Mary. So do I," Marlowe sighed. "Anything come up that wasn't scheduled for today?" It was a routine question, born of futile hope. There was always something to spoil the carefully planned daily schedules. "Yes and no, sir." Marlowe cocked an eyebrow at the interphone. "Well, that's a slight change, anyway. What is it?" "There's a political science observer from Dovenil, that's more 2 on our map, sir, who's requested permission to talk to you. He's here on the usual exchange program, and he's within his privileges in asking, of course. I assume it's the ordinary thing. What's our foreign policy? How do you apply it? Can you give specific instances? And the like." Precisely, Marlowe thought. For ordinary questions there were standard answers, and Mary had been his secretary for so long that she could supply them as well as he could. Dovenil. More 2, eh? Obviously there was something special about the situation, and Mary was leaving the decision to him. He scanned through his memorized star catalogs, trying to find the correlation. "Mr. Secretary?" Marlowe grunted. "Still here, just thinking. Isn't Dovenil that nation we just sent Harrison to?" "Yes, sir, on the same exchange program." Marlowe chuckled. "Well, if we've got Harrison down there, it's only fair to let their fellow learn something in exchange, isn't it? What's his name?" "Dalish ud Klavan, sir." Marlowe muttered to himself. "Dalish ud Klavan. Irish corned beef and cabbage." His mind filed it away together with a primary color picture of Jiggs and Maggie. "All right, Mary, I'll talk to him if you can find room in the schedule somewhere. Tell you what, let him in at 15:30. Meade and I can furnish a working example for him. Does that check all right with your book?" "Yes, sir. There'll be time if we carry over on the Ceroli incidents." "Ceroli's waited 6 years, 4 months, and 23 days. They'll wait another day. Let's do that then, Mary." "Yes, sir." Marlowe switched off and picked up a report, which he began to read by the page block system, his eyes almost unblinking between pages. "Harrison, eh?" he muttered once.